Greetings, Rothlings, and welcome to SpaceWeek Live for Sunday, June 13th, 2021. So, hey, look what arrived. We've got my my raw space steak, my steak in space t-shirt sample got here. It makes me chuckle. So, yeah, welcome. Thanks for coming. And if you have any questions, go ahead and post them in the chat. Just make sure to tag my name, rawspace, or @rawspace, so we're sure to see them and we can collate the questions and I will address them at the end, as always. Looking at the last week, there actually there was a launch that I wasn't expecting, but we'll get to that later. First of all, on Thursday, we had an annular solar eclipse, which is what happens when during a new moon. It's when the moon passes in front of the sun, but due to the elliptical nature of the moon's orbit, sometimes it's a little farther away and sometimes it's a little closer. And so when the moon is a little bit too far away, when it passes in front of the sun, it doesn't fully cover the face of the sun, and what we get is a ring of fire, as they call it, where the sun will be mostly covered, but there will be a ring of the sun's photosphere visible around the edges of the moon. It's a pretty spectacular sight, although you do not, during an annular solar eclipse or a partial, you do not get to see the solar corona or solar prominences or any of that sort of dim detail, because the sun's photosphere is so incredibly bright. Even 1% or 0.5% of the sun being visible will drown out any possibility of seeing the sort of total solar eclipse stuff that we are used to. So, but I did want to show you some photos here. So this is just a generic web photo of an annular solar eclipse. I don't think this is actually of the one from from a few days ago. But here we have a photo of the Capitol Dome in Washington, D.C. That's the U.S. Capitol building, taken by NASA's Bill Engels. So this is actually a NASA photo, or from a NASA person. And it only the eclipse was only visible in its partial phase at sunrise for most of the eastern U.S. The totality, or I should say the annularity, the ring of fire, was only visible far to the north in Canada and across the Arctic and into Russia. So totality or annularity was not visible in the U.S. And here we have, this is really cool. This is a photo from Basel, Switzerland by Reddit user Slow-Mo Luke. This is a photo of the ISS transiting in front of the sun during the partial phase of the eclipse, which is pretty BA, if I do say so. The ISS transits of the sun and the moon are sort of a holy grail of astrophotography, because it happens really fast. Like from the time the ISS enters one side of the sun to the time it exits the other side is only about a half a second. Like, it's really fast. And so you pretty much have to be, zoomed in with your telescope or your long lens, taking video, perfect exposure, perfect, crispness, perfect focus at the exact right time in order to catch it. And I tried once and I failed, but I should give it some more attempts, because it's it's one of those things that, as a photographer, is a really neat thing to have accomplished. Then early this morning, Northrop Grumman launched one of the last Pegasus XL rockets bearing the TAC-RL-2, or Tactically Responsive Launch 2 satellite, up to low Earth orbit. This Space Force satellite will detect artificial objects in orbit, part of their Space Domain Awareness Initiative. Now, Pegasus XL is an air-launched rocket, a Northrop Grumman L-1011 airplane lifted off from Vandenberg Air Force Base in the wee hours, like 3-something in the morning, in California, carrying the rocket under its wing. It ascended to its release altitude, then it let the rocket go. Pegasus XL's solid-propelled engine then ignited, and it pitched upward, ascending to orbit. Now, they did not provide live coverage of this, but there are some... Sorry, just... Where's Wally says, if at first you don't succeed, give up. No, that's not the saying. Anyway, you threw me off. So, yeah, Pegasus XL. What was I saying? Probably nothing important. All right, so that was actually the only launch last week. It was a quiet week, aside from the eclipse. And, oh yes, I was saying they didn't provide live coverage. However, they did announce that the launch was a success, and there were some, I don't have them queued up for you, but there were some photos taken by people of the launch, the air launch from a distance, confirming that it did in fact, launch. So looking ahead to this week is going to be a bit busier. Let's see. On Tuesday, June 15th at 7 a.m. Eastern, 11 GMT, a Northrop Grumman solid-fueled Minotaur 1 rocket will launch from Pad 0B at the Mid-Atlantic Regional Spaceport, aka Mars, on Wallops Island, Virginia, bearing NROL-111, a classified spy satellite for the National Reconnaissance Office, bound for low Earth orbit. Now, NROL-111 was supposed to launch back in 2018, but it was delayed to 2019, then 2020, and now June 2021. Reportedly, these delays were at the request of the National Reconnaissance Office, but their reasoning is private. It's classified, so we don't know why the delays happened. Now, as you may recall, Minotaur 1's Minotaur 1 is basically repurposed from old ICBMs. Minotaur 1's first stage comes from Orbital Science's Taurus rocket, which was also called the Minotaur C, which in turn was based on the Peacekeeper intercontinental ballistic missiles first stage. Minotaur's second stage comes directly from a decommissioned Minuteman II ICBM. Orbital Sciences, which is now part of Northrop Grumman, repurposes old ICBM parts for their orbital launch vehicles, beating their swords into plowshares, one might say. Then on Wednesday, June 16th, starting at 6 a.m. Eastern, 10 GMT, there's an ISS spacewalk to install the first ISS Rollout Solar Array, or IROSA, on the space station's P6 truss, which we can see here. Astronauts Thomas Pesquet, French astronaut, and Shane Kimbrough will install the first of 6 new IROSAs, which will ultimately increase the station's power output by up to 30%. This IROSA will be mounted on top of and will augment the old 2B solar array on the front left corner of the ISS. That's on the forward side at the port end of the truss. Port meaning left in nautical speak. The first 2 IROSAs were delivered to the ISS on Saturday, June 5th in the trunk of SpaceX Cargo Dragon CRS-22, as you may recall. The Spacewalk live stream will be available here on Raw Space, of course. I'll open it up with a live intro and explanation of what's going on. Though official coverage begins 90 minutes before the spacewalk itself is scheduled to start at 8 a.m. Eastern, 12 GMT, and will last about 6.5 hours. Possibly happening later on Wednesday the 16th, at 8 p.m. Eastern, or midnight GMT on the 17th, China will be launching their first crew of taikonauts to the Chinese space station. That is the Tianhe module of the Guangzhou space station. The date and time are not yet confirmed, so stay tuned for possible changes. I've seen references to the 16th and the 17th, but those dates were delayed from June 10th earlier, so stay tuned and we'll see. But the Shenzhou 12 crew spacecraft will launch atop a Long March 2F rocket from Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center in the remote Gobi Desert of northwest China. Here, let's zoom in a little bit. So here we have a big desert, and over here we have, I have no idea what that says, but here we have the actual, there's the vertical assembly building and 2 launch pads. Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center. So although this is a very high-profile launch for China, it's unknown whether there will be a live broadcast. In the 3+ years I've been doing this, I've never seen live coverage from Jiuquan. Also, being a manned launch, the CNSA may be reluctant to provide live video in case something goes wrong. So, wouldn't expect live coverage, but they may surprise us. Mark Desire in the chat says those are not the first Chinese taikonauts in space. That's correct. These are not the first taikonauts in space, but they will be the first crew of the Chinese space station, of the current Chinese space station, the modular one. Then Wednesday also marks, nope. There we go. Boop. Wednesday also marks the 58th anniversary of the first woman in space. Russian Valentina Tereshkova flew on Vostok 6 on June 16, 1963, making her not only the first woman, but the youngest woman in space to this day, the only woman to have flown a solo mission to space, and the first civilian in space. Lots of records there. She orbited Earth 48 times, and she spent almost 3 days in space. So, bravo, Valentina Tereshkova. Then on Sunday, June 20th, starting at 6 a.m. Eastern, 10 GMT, is another spacewalk to install the second IROSA solar array. Same schedule, same spacewalkers as before. This time, Pesquet and Kimbrough will be installing the new array in the 4B position, opposite the first one they installed just 4 days previous. So that is it for the coming week. Let me go ahead and get to your questions. Let's see here. Nathaniel Hosea. Do you feel that there is too much politics involved in our space projects, and why? Absolutely. Unfortunately, space is hard and space is expensive, and space involves a lot of risk. A lot of risk and a lot of no guarantee of return on investment. So those sorts of activities that are very expensive with a lot of risk and no guaranteed return on investment tend to be the domain of governments rather than corporations. Corporations don't like to spend a lot of money that they are not sure they're going to get a return on. Additionally, governments, they have a lot of governmental type things that they want to projects that they want to do, as far as, intelligence capabilities and providing services such as GPS and, monitoring environmental conditions and doing scientific research according to, executive mandates, et cetera, that companies are not going to, they're not going to foot the bill for that. So the taxpayer has to. Well, unfortunately, when it's the taxpayer footing the bill, it's the politicians controlling the flow of those funds. So, yes, politics and space are very much tied up together, and it sucks. But, if not for government investment in space, we probably wouldn't be there. Honestly, because it's the big influx of government, military industrial complex, whatever projects that pushes the industry forward. And then once there's sort of a foundation built, private industry can kind of take it from there, which is why we have, in the beginning, what we saw were government launches, Apollo mission, things like that. And in successive decades, we get more and more commercial endeavors in space with, mega constellations for internet access and Earth imaging and all sorts of other things. But now I think that as time progresses, we will see less. We're not going to see less politics in space, but we are going to see more commercial involvement in space. We already have, but we're going to continue seeing more commercial involvement in space, which is a good thing because, even though corporations are profit-driven and they don't always place an emphasis on pure research and things like that, which is the sort of thing that NASA does, they still have vast resources, and they can sort of, level the playing field, sort of bringing space down to Earth, as it were. Metap Ukar says, I loved your t-shirt. I'm an old school RuneScape fan. So I don't know if you can see it from there, but the stake is actually my microphone is in the way. The stake is actually pixelated. It's basically a an emoji turned into a t-shirt graphic, but I just came up with that because I thought it was funny. It's available in the merch store if anybody's interested. Let's see, merch. You know, in fact, I have some fancy tools at my disposal here. Watch this. Doo-doo-doo. If it ever kicks in. All right, so let me move on while that's chunking along. Rhonda Weilman says, greetings, best of health to you and everyone in the chat. Well, thank you. Thank you, and best of health to you and yours. Space community, greetings. Please explain if Northrop Grumman launch or Northrop Grumman SS Katherine Johnson Cygnus cargo craft from the ISS to Earth. So, Northrop Grumman, they have sort of extended periods of, you know what? Let me fade out that music, because there we go. There are months at a time where we don't hear much from Northrop Grumman in regards to space. This week is not one of those times. So Northrop Grumman launched their Pegasus XL last night, and they will be launching Minotaur later this week. And then the Northrop Grumman Cygnus cargo craft, the SS Katherine Johnson, will be departing the ISS, but not until the 27th. So that's 2 weeks from now. So I'll be covering that in next week's Space Week. Where's Wally? So once installed, the gap in those panels, referring to the IROSs, the new solar arrays, once installed, the gap in those panels should be covered. So let's wait for the first ISS transit that clearly shows the IROS is installed. That's right. If you remember that, I don't have it up anymore, but if you remember that picture of the ISS transit in front of the sun, we'll actually be able to see, I mean, observers on the ground with telescopes will actually be able to see the new ISS solar array, or arrays, as they are installed, or once they're installed and unfurled. During the spacewalk, they're going to attach the new solar array, but then, just like a yoga mat, I guess, the array literally rolls out along the length of about, I guess, 40% of the length, 30 or 40% of the length of the old solar array, and it's going to cover up that gap, that sort of characteristic gap in between the old solar array panel halves. So yes, it'll definitely be observable from the Earth. Brian Sample, when do you think a manned mission will leave our solar system, if ever? So humans still have not been farther than the moon. I mean, the farthest any humans ever been are the Apollo astronauts on the far side of the moon. So they would be, the moon's distance plus a handful of miles as they orbited the moon during the Apollo missions. But first we've got to, there's a lot of steps involved in expanding, in humanity's expansion into space. First we've got to crawl, then we've got to walk, and then we can maybe fly at some point. But we have yet to even get to Mars, which is easy peasy compared to the outer solar system, where a mission would take multiple years. And leaving the solar system, in which direction? I mean, if a human mission were headed for the nearest other star, which would be Proxima Centauri, then, I mean, with current technology, it would take us between 50,000 and 100,000 years to get there. Well, I mean, your ship is going to fall apart long before then, just from, chemical degradation and bombardment by cosmic rays and whatnot, potential impacts with, stuff out there in the far reaches of space. So human mission outside the solar system, I like to be hopeful. I mean, I'm a sci-fi buff, and I love fantasizing about the possible future of our species, but maybe never, because again, and I've discussed this before, unless we come up with a way to cheat physics, to either achieve faster than light travel or near the speed of light travel, unless we're able to reduce our travel time to other stars from tens of thousands of years down to maybe a few years, then I don't see us leaving the solar system at all. But if we are able to, come up with a propulsion mechanism, a propulsion technology that allows us to basically have a torch ship or some other, method of achieving great speed far above and beyond what we're currently capable of with our chemical propulsion, then yeah. But I don't think that would probably be in the next. Probably not in the next couple hundred years, at least. But what do I know? Where's Wally? Is it true Tom Cruise is going to film on the ISS? I think so, but I haven't seen a schedule for that launch. I think they have solid plans to actually fly Tom Cruise and of course, this would presumably be on a SpaceX Crew Dragon vehicle, which can accommodate in the current configuration can accommodate 4 people. So Tom Cruise, a cameraman, and maybe another actor. I don't know, and probably an astronaut as the pilot. But I haven't seen an actual date on that, though I haven't been following the story too closely. It'd be interesting to see, though. I mean, some people make fun of that as like a waste of time or whatever, but I don't think so. I mean, it brings huge visibility to civilian spaceflight, and it will allow them to get footage that would be completely impossible on the Earth. So I think it's pretty cool. Pushing the boundaries of cinema. Hugh Salter. Do you think the new Space Force will fulfill our destiny in space? I wouldn't think so. I mean, the Space Force is basically a reorganization of the U.S. Air Force's Space Command, a reorganization and expansion of the U.S. Space Forces, the U.S. Air Force's Space Command. And their mission is military in nature. I mean, it's to expand our nation's, the United States' space power projection capability, support the forces on the ground and in the air with various systems, and as well as intelligence and so on and so forth. As far as like colonial marines and visiting other planets and things like that, I mean, unless in the far future, the Space Force mission expands to encompass new realities, I think that Space Force is going to remain Earth-centric and essentially Earth-bound, not bound to the ground, but bound to our planet. Mark Desire, what happens to the old array? So the old iconic space station solar arrays will remain, and they will be covered up. Let me switch over to... I wish I had a tool to like draw on the screen. But anyway, so you see that red solar array there. That's the old array. The new IROSA array will go over the top of that and cover, I think, about half of it. And it's not quite as wide. The new IROSA arrays are not quite as wide as the old arrays, and they're about half as long, I think. But they're much more energy, they're much more efficient at generating solar power. And so the old arrays will remain, and yeah, and they'll continue to generate power where they're not being covered up by the new arrays. Yeah, I mean, if they wanted to keep all of the old array square footage as power production and then add the new arrays as completely new power production, then they would need to add additional truss segments on the port and starboard sides of the space station, which would be a much bigger project and much more expensive than simply putting the new, more efficient arrays over the top of a portion of the old arrays. Space community, are there cosmic dusts that can fog up solar panels, or are they self-cleaning? So you're not going to get a fogging effect in space. I mean, first of all, fog is water vapor, like condensed water vapor, like clouds. And, you know, water vapor, I mean, you can't have you can't have liquid water in a vacuum. It'll evaporate and then turn to sort of micro ice crystals. But those aren't going to cling to anything because they disperse too aggressively. They disperse immediately. You know, the vapor, like the liquid water turns to vapor, the vapor disperses, and whatever molecules of ice they become are just sort of free floating. They're not consolidated in any kind of visible way. Now, as far as cosmic dust, there is definitely cosmic dust. There are micrometeoroids. Let me go full screen again. There are micrometeoroids and other hazards that are out there. But they're not going to rest on anything. Like, if a dust particle, I mean, in space, you know, if you're traveling through a cloud of cosmic dust, well, first of all, it's going to be a very diffuse cloud because of the way space is. Everything is far apart, except for, you know, celestial objects, planets, asteroids, moons, and you know, so if there is a particle or a very small space rock that you come into contact with, it's not going to be just bebopping along at the same velocity and in the same direction that you are. I mean, it's going to hit you at tens of thousands of miles per hour. You know, I mean, when we see meteor streaks in the sky, those I mean, those are like grains of sand, things like that. But those little bits of comets and such are traveling at 40, 50,000 miles an hour relative to Earth. And, you know, I mean, Earth itself is traveling 66,000 miles per hour around the sun. So basically, any intersection of two objects in space is going to be at incredible speed. And it can poke a hole in you. It can, if you have, you know, sufficient protection, like protective blankets or protective shielding, it might just make a little divot. You know, it can put but yeah, there's going to be no accumulation of dust. I mean, or anything like that. Like the ISS has been orbiting for more than 20 years, and the solar panels have been struck by many micrometeoroids, but there hasn't been any significant damage. And there's definitely no sort of fogging or accumulation of material on the outside. Hopefully that explains it sufficiently. Let's see. All right, so it looks like that might wrap it up for today. Let's see here, analytics. Okay, lighter crowd than that week, than last week. That's all right. But thank you so much for coming. All right, Mark Desire is saying you only see me, no additional screens. So you don't see that? I see it. Okay. Well, as a matter of fact, I even see it in my own replay of the video. So, all right. In any case, thank you all for coming. Until next time, keep it raw. Hope to see you in the live streams this week. And until next time, bye-bye.